You know, Andy, I remember when I moved to Toronto in 1984 to attend what was then Ryerson Polytechnical Institute. The place you had to go whenever you had time was around the corner at Sam the Record Man,
Yep.
right at Yonge and Gould. It was iconic in the history of Toronto, as was the big HMV store on Yonge Street and nearby the world's biggest bookstore. Tomorrow evening, Wednesday evening, a first-of-its-kind historical walk is being held to explore the rise and fall of these city institutions in the Yonge and Dundas neighborhood. The walk will be led by local historian Jeremy Hopkin and author Cam Gordon, who joins us now on the Morning Zoom with Andy and Jane. Good morning, Cam.
Hi, thanks so much for having me today. And I'm very jealous you went to Ryerson. I went to McMaster, and the proximity to these stores, I was always very envious of my friends who went to Ryerson. I would never be in class if I went to Ryerson. I left town for those 4 years.
Cam, this is a really cool tour. I remember when it had nothing to do with going to Ryerson or any other school, but I remember when I first started working in downtown Toronto, it was right at Yonge and Dundas, and I was always at HMV. That was kind of my era of music stores, but Sam the Record Man right next door, it was still there. So this is really, really cool. Paint us a picture very quickly here, Cam, of the Yonge Dundas area when Sam the Record Man, HMV, the world's biggest bookstore, when they were still in business, they were all booming. Paint us a picture of that area of Toronto at that time.
Yeah. I mean, it was a great time, and I'm in my late 40s, so I have one foot in the old school and one foot in the new school. I mean, this whole tour came out of writing my book, Track Changes. That's about the impact of the internet on Canadian music, and there's a whole chapter on retail that actually details how HMV and Sam the Record Man and basically music retail as we knew it, tried to cope with the internet, and spoiler alert, they didn't, like a lot of businesses. So this tour really came out of the growth of that. So I mean, yeah, to paint the picture, when we were putting together this tour, we really described it as a circuit. Generally, if you were going to HMV, I'd say 90% of the time you also end up in Sam the Record Man, and probably 70% of the time you also just hop across the street over to the world's biggest bookstore. They were in such close proximity to each other. And I mean, obviously, like, our cities change. Like, I didn't want this to be purely a tour about nostalgia. It's more about, the changing fabrics of our city. But to have these, like, three incredible, like, I almost describe them as, like, mausoleums to music and media and literature within really footsteps was incredible. And I really called these places, all three of them, they weren't public spaces. These were for-profit operations, but they functioned as public spaces. Before the internet, or even during the early days of the internet, if you want to be around music fans, book fans, you knew where to go, and you could spend hours in these places. And I speak from experience because I spent hours in these places, throughout, like, my high school years and university and sort of in my 20s, and that they were huge to me, learning about music, literature, like a lot of things. Like, I probably wouldn't have had my career. Like, I've worked in PR, I've written this book, I've done a lot of stuff, freelance music writing. That probably wouldn't have happened without these three stores.
Well, I remember even when the HMV store opened, it was 333 Yonge Street, right?
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah. Great address.
And as a young radio person working in rock and roll radio back then, Alice Cooper performed on the roof. Do you remember that?
I actually, I'll be sharing some QR codes that link out to some different, like, articles and photos. There's actually some photos in the Toronto Sun of his performance there, and he did. I don't think he had his snakes with him that day, but yeah, like,
I was there.
That's one of the things about all three of these stores. The talent alone that passed through for in-store appearances. Alice Cooper. Like, at HMV, Mariah Carey was there, the Beastie Boys. I met Joe Strummer from The Clash, like, a year before he died there, and got some photos, and the Beastie Boys were there. Like, world's biggest bookstore had all, like, the Canadian authors of that era, like Pierre Burden and Margaret Atwood. So, at a time today where, celebrity is so monetized, you think of, like, Comic-Con, where, you're paying $150 or $200, to have a selfie with, like, Richard Dreyfuss. or whoever.
Richard Dreyfuss. What a name to pull, Cam.
Well, he did, like, Jaws had an anniversary and he was in Toronto for Comic-Con and he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. So. but then you look back at these times, you see there's Alice Cooper, there's the Spice Girls, there's Jeff Buckley, there's Gordon Lightfoot. They all passed through these stores. It was such a different time. And again, I don't want this to be purely about nostalgia, but like it really was special. Our entire relationship with recorded music, books, even like celebrity was so different and really manifested in Toronto for those stores.
You know, you talk about the nostalgia and how it manifested in Toronto. Somebody who grew up kind of just outside of Toronto and Markham, we had all these stores, right? We had the HMVs, we had the big chapters, but we didn't it wasn't the spectacle that it was at the stores at Yonge and Dundas. And that's what really, I think, made these stores different. And for somebody that lived outside of Toronto but came into the city, that's what made them so special. Is they were more than a music store. It was more than a bookstore. It was a cultural hub. It was like we've talked about, it was a gathering place. It was a concert stage. It was something that, as somebody who was young, who looked at Toronto as somewhere to, aspire to be, those places were where it almost felt like I made it when I was shopping for music in Sam the Record Man. It really did. So, to have those places as part of our city at the time really was a big deal. And all the stars that came through kind of showed that.
Yeah, it was really a source of pilgrimage. I grew up in Thornhill, so I'm right there. And respectfully, there was a Sam the Record Man at Fairview Mall, close to where I grew up, but not quite the tome of music that 347 Yonge Street was. And yeah, like two other things about this tour that I think we really want to draw on. All three of those places before the internet, where you could like sample stuff and go to like YouTube or TikTok if you wanted a little song snippet or a bit of. It was really, music and books were so finite, but HMV especially like really was pioneer with like listening stations where, you could go and throw on these shared headphones, which during COVID age, I'm not sure would pass muster, but regardless, or they had the listening station. Like I remember taking these like $30, $40 import CDs because I wanted to hear like, these weird Japanese bands I'd only read about, or, avant-garde jazz, all this stuff. I became like a huge music nerd, and it was the only place you could hear some of this stuff. And to their credit, the folks at HMV, they did not like bat an eye. Let's say take like the $100 box set, they'd like crack the spine, let you listen to it, just leave you alone. Like it was incredible public service.
Amazing.
Again, even though they were like a for-profit company.
So Cam, do we just show up at where do we go for the tour tomorrow night from 7 to 8 p.m., Wednesday evening, 7 to 8?
Yeah, so we're going to meet at across the street from 10 Edward Street. So there's the bookstore B&B Books. So it's going to be across the street from there. To situate for folks of that generation, remember these stores, it's basically across the street from where the world's biggest bookstore was.
Right.
And we situated that as a meeting point because you can actually see where all three stores are from that point. And yeah, myself and Jeremy are going to be just sharing histories of all three. Like I said, I've got some QR codes lined up, so if people bring their cell phones, they can just zap those. I'll open up like articles, old photos, ads. A lot of these in stores I talked about, I've grabbed some screen caps. So we're going to try and make it interactive. Hopefully, I'm told we're going to have some people who actually worked at these stores too, which I think will be fascinating. We want to get their firsthand memories of what it was like to actually like work in these places. Because in writing the book, I heard some wild stories, and I hope people come ready to share.
Cam Gordon, thank you so much. Good luck with the tour. Great idea. Make sure you take everybody by the store that was the Big Slice, because next to going to these music stores and the world's biggest bookstore, you had to go to the Big Slice for a monstrous slice of pizza.
I'll get some pizza ovens installed in the next 24 hours, and we'll have a snack right after. We'll make it a true Yonge Street experience.
Exactly. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you. Good luck with it.